next we have Chia Amisola. Chia Amisola is a Filipino internet artist exploring the poetic potential of the browser through websites, games, tools, interactive fiction, and archives. Chia is the founder and organizer of Develop, a critical technology institute based in the Philippines, and stewards the Philippine Internet Archive, stewarding Filipino internet histories and counter-narratives. They received a BA in Computing and the Arts from Yale in 2022 and are currently a New Inc. Art and Code member. Chia Amisola.
Hi. Sorry if you can't see me, I'm very short. Thank you for the intro. I'm Chia. You'll see me in a moment. I'm a Filipino internet artist, and I use websites, as you see here, as a medium, and make games, tools, archives. My work is often situated in a very familiar story that maybe a lot of us relate to of living and growing up online. And for me, a lot of my upbringing in the Philippines within a post-colonial internet of extremes informs what I do. And something about me is that I've been making websites for as long as I can remember. Websites to me served as this source of liberation and self-preservation in a pretty repressive environment. I could create space for myself, name that place, save it. From this interest in developing personal sites to offering resources, making games and experiences, I've been thinking about websites as worlds and environments of their own. Being so enveloped within the internet, loving, finding myself through it, I try to use language and place and this thinking about the web as a world in itself to make sense of it. I guess the core of a lot of my work is that whenever I make a website, I often just ask, how can creation be synonymous to liberation? My thinking often draws me to the current internet's environment. Unlike these kind of like single-purpose poetic sites and sketches that I often do, I often think about the internet today as one that is corporate, centralized, surveilled, silent, violent. Site making is an act of challenging these notions. The internet, after all, is a built environment. Over the past few months, I've been thinking a bit through these themes and developing a performance practice for my websites that I call Internet Ambient. They're networked, participatory performances that consider the browser as a site of poetics, a site of placemaking. Windows and websites are my medium, as you can see. Here, I figure out how to present them, how to inhabit them. And maybe like the silly question that I ask myself is, how do you read a website? So the websites I make are all websites you can visit alone on your computer. But what I've been presenting these sites, or what I've been working on presenting them is these offline experiences as installations, as experiences, as gatherings. What you see are snapshots of a performance I did in the city just a couple of weeks ago. Thank you, Alexa. I've also been reading some works that I've done over the past year in Berlin and Manila throughout the summer. Most of the pieces that I'll be showing you are things I created in the last few months. Been working on adding network elements to them. And for the showcase, I'll be showcasing a selection of these and a few new works. Oftentimes, these sites deal with love, labor, and liberation. There are methods for me to confront the self as someone who has grown up extremely online, thinking about self-preservation as a work of communal preservation. The themes that I work on are at times personal, drawing from identity, queerness, isolation. Others also draw from more universally thinking about my life in the Philippines, grappling with religion, extremism, ritual, immigration, the territorialization, and the fracturing of the internet as a whole. I think how the website is not neutral at all, even though it often posits itself to be. It's never apolitical. In form, I'm brought to ask who serves and is served. In the making of these sites, I repeat, I tend, I gather, I labor slowly. Technology has become ritual in itself to me, its own form of process. When networks promise us connection, intimacy, they often seize it. All these concepts of my fixation are often drawn from metaphors and ideologies that underlie the humanity that I think is hidden within machines that I'm just seeking to really uncover. Visually, a lot of my internet art pieces are pretty evocative of the early web. Use dithered assets, low resolution stuff, because it's accessible to the people who need it most, and also I think it's just interesting. Windows, pop-ups, and alerts often overtake the browser, the machine, and thus the user. Auditorily, when I present these works, I just read, as I'm doing to you now. They often take the form of a poetry or hypertext reading. They're often also accompanied by live ambient music I perform, usually just sample cut, loop, and at times work with audience input and feedback loops. So when I do these, I read, I click, I turn knobs, 3 things at once. These works are also often participatory. I consider them unique, pretty generative. No performance of these works is the same. They're always varied, from the way I assemble the browsers, from the way I bring windows up, from the way the audience interacts with me. Here, the audience, in this piece, the audience changes the contents, reading, and temperature of the work. All the inputs you see are things that audiences have sent me. I'm interested in general in challenging the notion of a website, how it is made, how it is experienced, read, and remembered. And you can see that I often make use of inherent properties of the browser, using defaults of it. Using the native style of elements means that the work kind of evolves, rots, decays. It's ephemeral in form, just like the internet. Adherent to the ever-evolving standards of the web that humans always shape and reshape. In my work, I think about alt text and metadata, once invisible, turning them into poetic tools. As the work is born within defaults, so does it live within the browser's constraints. I often play with underexposed attributes of the browser. The work duplicates. It's generative. Hidden elements become the primary modes of reading. I prompt you to consider tab titles, hidden elements. The work duplicates. The work asks. The work prompts. We're only moving towards each other is one of the pieces that I plan to show and what I'm kind of going through now. I developed it in a weekend early in the year. It's about 15,000 words. And I call it this browser concrete poem, simply because the progression is varied and browser windows are, of course, inherently recomposable. There are theoretically thousands of permutations and ways of experiencing the piece. No experience on screen and off screen is the same. As you can tell also, the works are pretty textual. I most often work in them directly in the code editor, previewed with the browser preview right next to it. So the programming and the prose are written side by side. I'm interested in the constraints that working directly within the code editor affords my work. Data structures become equivalent linguistic tools. Arrays and how arrays and disperse affect my enjambment, attributes provided and then taken away. In a key press, change the preservation of white space. Working with deprecated or obsolete or impractical technologies brings me to think about standards. Broadly, what I'm influenced by is this practice of ambient poetics that consider the felt place and situated technologies. The internet is an environment. I draw from dematerialization, surveilled violence of disquiet, elemental media, the concept of ecology without nature, the divides between nature and the self. Here, I think often about the machine and the self. Hypertext and interactive fiction movements are, of course, probably the core inspiration to my work, as it is pretty verbose, referential. And I think about hypertext as a mode of performance, not just what you describe electronic text as a medium. When I stutter, when I lag, when I type, when I am human in my interaction with my machine, when I tab, when everything is throttled, when I'm interrupted, these are all parts of the performance. How can the static website, after all, the environment that we constantly find ourselves in, be something that is performed, as we always find that our interaction with the internet is a performed one? I'll be sharing a new body of work and poems in the browser in this space next month, ones that move people to think about history, sites, and tabs as unexpected ways of reading. So I've been sharing snippets of these works online. You can take a peek. Just like this presentation acting as a performance of the web itself. And looking back at these works, maybe internet ambient seems like a bit of a misnomer. This format of performance doesn't seem ambient or minimalist at all. It is all-enveloping. It is maximalist. It is intrusive, requiring a new form of engagement, awareness, and interfacing with the way we normally interact with the browser. Ultimately, I think that this is all about environments. I think this is all about the poetics of visibility, of opacities, of working with underlying mechanics of things, the defaults of the browser as material and mediums for me to define the internet as an environment where I might be heard. And in the end, I often just ask, what world can a website be? How can these gatherings, offline and online, change people's ideas of what the internet can be? How can more people engage in this mode of collective placemaking? What does it mean to gather and be together and change the environment of the web today? Thank you.
Thank you, Chia. Are there any questions before we exit? Yeah? Any questions? Yes, I see one right there in the middle.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. It's beautiful. At the top in Steve's intro, he mentioned something about an archive that you're running, and I'm just curious about your work in archiving and what archiving means in your practice.
Yeah, I guess the source of my interest in archiving is that websites for me have formed of kind of like an imperfect way of archiving the self. When I look back at my early years, when I started making websites when I was like 7, it's like the only records I really have of my early self. I think also about how much of collective memory making and how just like living is done online, and these often happen on centralized platforms like social networks that people often don't have control over. A lot of our data exists in servers and places that we don't really have control over. And I'm interested in this work of preservation just because it is where I've lived, it's where my work lives. I've worked on kind of small folk archives that have kind of been working at kind of representing community and like sources of information, such as like representing old collections of Philippine cassette tapes, old government records into sites where they were once found in Google Drives or Facebook groups or like WhatsApp chats. And I'm hoping to kind of work on a larger movement with the Philippine Internet Archive that you can kind of look up and see, just for starting as like a publishing effort, more than it is like a equivalent to the Great Internet Archive that we also have in the city. I've also been thinking about what important narratives and groups and histories of institutions and communities and people have not been saved on the internet and how we can begin writing these into history more. Yeah. Thank you.
Any others? No, one more.
Hi, you mentioned that your work was generative and that there's many different paths a performance can take. When you are performing, do you plan out the route that you're going to take, or do you just go on the spot? And do you ever regret picking a certain route or not get to show the audience something?
What was the last part of that?
Do you ever wish you had picked a different route and wanted to show the audience something that you didn't get to see, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, when I say something is generative, it just means I use a lot of like math random statements and conditions in the code. I often, obviously when I'm reading and performing, sometimes I think, wow, this sequencing would really work well with this scene next, and it often doesn't work out that way, but I think that's the fun of it, and it motivates me to perform more. But of course, I will like program in like little hacks that let me jump to an area I want, if I want to divert the route a lot more. But I think part of that unexpectedness and that element of like surprise is something I appreciate in the work. Like obviously I'm familiar with the code, I wrote everything, but I wanted to feel like the early internet when we were stumbling on things, aside from just like following linear sequences and trails. Yeah.